and turn the platform over to Audrey. Audrey, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And like Colleen mentioned, I am an emergency management specialist here in New Hanover County. Before I was brought on here, I was the director for the New Hanover Disaster Coalition, which was formed right after Hurricane Florence, and served as the long-term recovery group for New Hanover County. So today, a little bit about me and my background. I have a bachelor's in social work from UNC Greensboro. Immediately, even while I was in my undergrad, I worked with the immigrant and refugee population in Greensboro, which actually has a very high refugee population for that area. And I worked with them for 5 years. So equity, diversity, and inclusion for both language, culture, and racial, and all of the different types of inclusion, whether it's disabilities or not, are very important to me. I kind of came into emergency work kind of on accident. I like to see the big picture. I like to plan as far as what's coming down the pipeline and things like that, and improve on what is already there. So when Hurricane Florence impacted this area, I volunteered for quite a while with Catholic Charities and the Harrelson Center and a couple of different groups in their warehouse and receiving and things like that, and saw how all of the different systems work together. And I wanted to jump in head first into the deep end to emergency work and kind of how to improve just the community aspect and coordination of resources and things like that. Like Colleen mentioned, I love questions and feedback. I want to make sure that today's presentation is useful for you. So if there is something that I'm covering and you feel like I kind of breeze through it, and it is something that does interest you in digging in a little bit deeper and having more information on it, just raise your hand, write it in the chat box, or we can unmute you and we can get in from there. I don't know everything. I will never pretend to know everything. You know your organization and business better than anyone else, meaning what works for your organization may not work for another, and what works for another may not work for yours. But the thing about emergency preparedness is you got to put something in place to have a little bit of a guideline, a little bit of a map to work off of. So we'll talk about some promising practices and also best practices throughout the day. And if you could, I would love to know what organizations are represented here today. Just like this, I can gear examples and things like that specifically to who's in attendance. So if you're a food bank, if you do rebuilding, if you're a church, if you're any other type of organization, just write down who your main services that you provide to the community here, so that I kind of tweak the examples as I go along best for who all is here. Awesome. That's really cool. Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right, so today we're going to talk about all of these things, right? We're going to talk about defining what preparedness is, what the steps of preparedness are, the different hazards that can be planned out a little bit on what our response would be. We're going to talk about internal preparedness within your organization, and then also external preparedness. And I'll get into kind of how I define that as well. Networking with a purpose, and how to move forward, right? What do you do when there's so much to do? Emergency preparedness does take a lot of time, and it is very overwhelming. And so how do you take that first step? And we'll talk about promising practices for that as well. And also COVID-19 specific tips. The reason I have that one kind of set to the side is with vaccinations coming around, and when our numbers are increasing, and so if your staff become positive and or are exposed and things like that, what are different ways that we can mitigate and prepare our organization to be more resilient in the long run? And then I'll talk about some resources that I have used several times to help with emergency planning. Awesome. So the FEMA definition of preparedness is preparedness within the field of emergency management can best be defined as a state of readiness to respond to a disaster, crisis, or any other type of situation. I feel like that's pretty broad. It does its job in defining what preparedness is. For me, I like to make it even more specific. Having your staff, your resources, and inventory at the ready for any and all emergencies, for any and all hazards, knowing and planning where you fit into the community in times of emergency. Not one person can do response, recovery, and mitigation by themselves. And so really knowing your piece of the puzzle and how that fits into the bigger picture of our larger community makes a big difference. And if your staff are ready, that makes it a lot easier to respond. So just a little bit of a difference there for me when in my mindset when I think about a nonprofit preparing or a business preparing. So the only way to really start making a plan is to start at the first step, and knowing your hazards. And I'll go over what those different hazards are and how to look into it. But know what plans and procedures you already have in place. If you already have some plans or procedures in place, then pull them out, pull them separate, and kind of review them and see if those are the ones that are still accurate. Are those still the procedures or plans that you are currently using? We suggest in emergency management that you review your plan at least yearly. And anytime you bring in any new staff, that will help greatly, just to make sure that everybody is still on the same page. Assess what you've done in the past, whether it's, so if you think of COVID specific, look at how you responded in March versus June versus now, and kind of see what went well, what didn't go well, what was good, what did people really respond well to, what are things that, you know what, we really kind of messed up. So what can we improve on in the future? That will definitely make a big difference as well. Know your community partners. Like I said, not one organization can do it all. If you're the organization that focuses on children's museum and children's resilience and programs like that, if you work with adult day programming, then those services still play a critical care in that person's holistic view. But trying to do, so if you are an adult day program, trying to do food and maybe adult hygiene products, and then you want to do case management, and then you want to do rebuilding, that gets to be a lot. And I understand that the need is there, but there are a lot of community partners that you can partner with to help you respond that way, to make sure that you are focusing on your services and let your community partners focus on theirs as well. We don't have to recreate the wheel. So that kind of goes into knowing your limitations. Frankly, responding in crisis without a plan is trying to create a puzzle without having the picture, right? You know generally what needs to do, but say I get hit by the bus and I'm the only one that knows what the emergency plan is, and it's not written out and it's not kind of practiced and vetted through our staff, then what happens to that emergency plan? So just having it written will really help. So the different types of hazards that are in place, and there's way more than these, but these are generally the ones that we see often in North Carolina: flash flooding, winter storms, tornadoes, mudslides, hazardous material spill. We do have a lot of railroads around here and a lot of hazardous materials. Hurricanes, COVID-19, cyber attack. How are you going to respond if there's a disgruntled employee or customer? I try not to say an active shooter, but it could get to that point. So how will you respond? And because humor is a good way to build resilience, is I'm not paranoid. I'm just knowledgeable about all the things that can go catastrophically wrong in life. It's basically the emergency planning mindset that we all have to have, right? Is not necessarily being paranoid and being a doomsday prepper, but definitely being aware of the hazards that can be around you. Here in New Hanover County, we have the Brunswick nuclear power plant here. We have GE has a station here. We have a lot of different hazards in our area on top of hurricanes, on top of COVID-19 and cyber attacks and things like that, that we have to be mindful of to prepare. If you have an airport, it could be that an airplane needs to do an emergency landing and it landed on the highway. I mean, it literally planning for the worst, hoping for the best. Are there any other hazards that anybody can think of? All right. So the best way to start burst pipes is a great one. Fire is a great one. Yep, absolutely. Um, yeah, gosh, both of those are very localized, right? So it wouldn't be a national declaration and wouldn't even be a state one, um, but it would definitely impact your local effects on being able to provide the services that you provide on a daily. So if you think about it, we have a lot of different groups um, within our staff, right? Think about their specific needs. If you're the leader, if you're the one that's taking charge and writing the plans, or if you were voluntold to be here, think about all of the different people that you work with and their specific needs. They may have families, they may have disabilities, they probably have homes to prepare, whether it's an apartment, a home, a mobile home, a rental, a temporary one, vehicle, and things like that. So they have to prepare themselves as well as help you prepare your nonprofits. If they know what's expected of them ahead of time at work, it's one less stressor that they're going to have when the time comes, when an emergency comes, when just because, I mean, Brene Brown says it all the time: clear is kind, unclear is unkind. If your staff is expected to stay in place and not evacuate, if there's a Cat 5 hurricane coming, or if you know that there's mudslides and things like that, then knowing that they need to bring their valuables, they need to make those plans for their homes, because they're not allowed to evacuate, or they're not suggested um, to evacuate, then it can make a big difference in how that individual prepares for their personal life as well as their work life. So when I talk about resources, what are your resources or assets? I'm thinking about your food pantry, your construction equipment, and the building itself. So what are the resources that you currently provide in your everyday business that you definitely know you will be providing 10 times more of during a crisis. So if I stick with the adult daycare program example, um, if you provide um, just a reprieve for caretakers, if you provide employment programs, and if you provide lunches and meals and possibly clothes, depending on what kind of program that you have, uh, more than likely you're going to have to provide those things a lot more in times of crisis because people will be cut off from resources, people may lose income, they may have nowhere else to turn to. Maybe you are their support system. And so just keeping those things in mind. So for a food pantry, if you provide food pantries on Wednesdays, then more than likely, kind of like during COVID, you will need to stand up and provide even more. Um, Also thinking about if you're going to have enough volunteers and staff to do that in times of crisis. And if you're not, then do you have a just-in-time training that you can put in place? How can you mitigate your resources? Think about your inventory and your computers and your case files. If everything is paper copies, if everything are hard assets or hard resources, how can you protect those from fire, from water, from, well, if you have paper documentation, you don't necessarily need to worry about cyber attacks, but vice versa, right? If everything is digital, how can you protect your servers? How can you protect your backup? So if you have it on OneDrive or do you just have it um, on your actual computer? What happens if your computer breaks down and all of your case files are on that computer and not backed up anywhere? Um, I know that money and funding for electronics can be very difficult to acquire, but purchasing just an external hard drive can be a big difference for businesses and nonprofits that do rely on um, a minimal budget and uh, keeping all of their electronic forms confidential, but also um, protected and electronic. So just small things like that will make a huge difference in being able to reopen your doors. Um, so for uh, when you're talking with your staff and your volunteers and the people that you serve, but mostly just internal, ask them, what does preparedness look like for them? What are some things that they would like in place to know what's expected of them, what's important to them going into preparedness? Um, Take a look at what your plans look like. And like I said, if you already have some of these policies in place, just pull them aside and really just put them together and copy paste into a document that you call your emergency plan. A lot of these things already probably exist. Um, and then once you know kind of what your plans look like, just base your future trainings around those items. Just like this, you know that everybody is up to date and aware of the changes that may happen. A lot of your local emergency management departments will have resources available as far as creating continuity of operation plans, as far as how to review them, how to find them, templates, and things like that. I will say, though, that a lot of um, emergency management departments are one person or possibly a part-time person. So that can be a little difficult for some emergency management departments. In New Hanover, we're lucky to have quite a few staff here, but we can always share resources, and that's pretty quick. As far as trainings if I go back to that real quick, there's a lot of different free trainings that are available on NC Terms, through UMCOR, through Catholic Charities USA, and so many others with the FEMA trainings. And honestly, there's so many out there. that it gets to be a little overwhelming on how many trainings there are. But there are some really good trainings, and there are also some not so great trainings. But just finding the ones that work for you, and maybe you'll get a tidbit here and there and make it your own. Like I said, what works for one organization may not work for another organization, and that is okay. And don't be shy about being open and honest about what went well and what didn't. Don't be shy to say, you know what? Yeah, we messed up. I messed up. That's actually going to show your staff strength, your volunteer strength, and also your client strength. And that will actually help you plan better for the next time to make sure that you don't repeat those mistakes. If you're looking at technology tools to help facilitate communication and processes with your staff and just internally, texts are always easier to go through than if you use phone calls and things like that. Group texts get to be very overwhelming, but if power outages are rampant, then it'll be very difficult to get through phone calls and things like that. It takes a lot more bandwidth for a phone call to go through than a text message. If you are a nonprofit and you're looking to say, you know what, you said to connect with my local emergency management department, how can I better connect with them? How can I even find who that is? More than likely, you can type in your county name and then local emergency management, and you'll be able to find their contact information. You can also go to North Carolina Emergency Management Association, and they have all of the different emergency management departments listed there with contact information. And even if you're just wanting to introduce yourself, that's wonderful, and say, hey, just wanted to get on your radar as far as we're this organization. We provide these services. Just keep us in mind if you ever do need to activate, and maybe our services could be of assistance. The last thing I want to mention for internal is that if you have communication staff, intern or volunteers, ask them to put together a social media toolkit to go along with your emergency plans. The reason being, it makes posting on social media on behalf of your page or through your emails a lot easier when you have a calm and thoughtful process to creating those posts. And it's not created in the heat of the moment. So if you know that there is a storm coming, or a tornado just occurred, or wildfires occurred, or there's civil unrest, you know that, okay, let me pull the language from that. And you probably do need to leave some of it a little generic, like this. You can put in the specific event name or whatever is occurring. Just have a skeleton of what your communication plan will look like. It's going to make a huge difference. All right, so moving on to external. Phil Triplett always says it's better to hand out business cards ahead of an emergency instead of when it's raining cats and dogs. And he is absolutely right. Knowing who you serve. So even internally as a nonprofit, who are your clients? Who do you serve? What are their specific needs? Do they know what to expect of you during a crisis? Do they know how to reach you? If they can't reach you, what is your backup plan? So if phones are down, if there's no power, if your building does catch fire, if your pipes do burst, how do they get updates from you? And then making sure that they are aware of how to get in touch with you and what your emergency plan is to communicate with them. Some organizations reach out to every single one of their clients before, during, and after a disaster. Some people will have 500 plus clients on their caseload or that they serve through their nonprofit, so they won't have that capacity because they're staffed with 4, and that's a little unrealistic. But if you say, you know what, we're going to post it on our Facebook page, and we're going to post it in an email blast, then at least they know what to look for from you. What do you provide them in blue sky versus gray sky? So blue sky days, if you haven't heard this term before, is just on a normal day-to-day, normal day-to-day services that you provide. Gray sky day could be you provide no services, you don't have the capacity to provide services, you got damaged, and so you are unable to, or you have tripled or quadrupled your services because there is a disaster. So think about what it is that you provide them. If you provide food and diapers and anything like that, word of mouth during times of disaster spreads so fast. So just keep in mind that if you say, hey, we're providing meals, food, and some of provisions, hygiene kits, and things like that, expect that word of mouth to go very quickly. Also, kind of on that note, keep track of your expenses because depending on the needs and the services, FEMA does have the private nonprofit funds. So keeping track of that, not that that process is easy, it's still a relatively new process, but keeping track of your reimbursement and your expenses will really assist if your organization does decide to file for FEMA. They have a lot of different webinars on that, and I'm not an expert on that aspect by any means, but that is a relatively new program that FEMA has, so I want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. I feel like I'm talking a lot, so if I'm speaking too fast or if there is anything, again, feel free to jot down some questions or anything that you're like, wait, hold on, you said that too fast. Just stop me and I'll go over it a little bit slower. So when we're thinking about what is your location versus your population served, what I mean by that is your location in the heart of a high needed area, or is it off to the side? Not that that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not criticizing by any means. Either way, it could be needed for partners to assist the community. So in times of disaster, your space, whether or not you're providing services or not, your space is an asset, whether it's to pre-position items or to actually provide the space so that people can pick up and do things from there. If it's to pre-position, that's very different than if it's going to be in the service area and the community is coming to pick it up from there. But yeah, other organizations may reach out to you, or if you want to do the outreach to other organizations, I'm sure they would appreciate kind of the heads up and the pre-planning behind it and the preparedness piece. Like this, it's not in the 10 p.m. phone call of who has a space in downtown or who has a space in this mobile home or near this mobile home park that may need assistance and things like that. So just thinking about who has that space, and if nobody has that area, who has box trucks, who has the capacity and the volunteers and the items to help us pull this all together. A lot of times with the coalition, what I ended up doing is pulling a lot of different partners who had the bags, who had the printed materials, who had all of the different items, but everybody only had 1 or 2 items. But he brought them all together, and we had amazing beginner emergency kits. And so we did our drive-through expo with that mindset. So it wasn't just one organization kind of putting these kits together. Everybody pitched in, and it made an amazing event. Yeah. So Obviously, preparedness doesn't happen overnight. This, like I said earlier, this gets very overwhelming. But if you have open and honest conversations with the people that you serve um, year round, it will come step by step. Um, it won't happen overnight and it won't happen in a week because emergency plans take a while to build, and that is okay. So if you think about it, if you build out your heater and fire safety and fraud prevention in the winter time, and communicate that with your clients or your customers or whoever, then that's awesome. And build out your own plans at the same time. Um, Spring tornadoes and mudslides just because it's more likely to rain, and then so on and so forth. Just thinking about doing this holistically. If people receive this information from 4 or 5 different organizations, it is better than never knowing at all. Um, as far as different resources that are in the area or different um, places that they can go for assistance. I know one thing that we keep hearing here is the medical bills and not knowing where to turn to and which foundations are going to assist with that um, and things like that. So just knowing what those resources are and who to reach out to that may know is going to make a big difference for your customers in the long run. Right, so networking with a purpose. Uh, I love this quote. It is absolutely true. Um, as far as connecting people with ideas, and people with opportunities. Because sometimes it's literally getting on the phone with somebody and just brainstorming and talking through it and really figuring it out. Um, it's really important to know who can fill gaps um, after a disaster. So long-term recovery groups are a great network of people connecting with your local emergency management department again, your local rebuilding agencies, your local churches, and social groups that are active in the community. Those are all kind of big picture. You'll be able to reach a lot of people, whether you want to focus on preparedness, funding, if you're looking for volunteers, if you're looking for resources to know kind of how you fit in to the bigger picture. And if we're all looking at this as a community, working hand in hand, just to make sure that we are taking care of one another, that will make a big difference. So if you do work with your local rebuilding agencies, and you know that they're going door to door to do damage assessments and to do that kind of thing, and you provide case management or you provide food services and things like that, or you have an abundance of volunteers, reach out to them and say, hey, would you mind if I tagged along and kind of got a needs assessment going to see if my services are needed? And if not, that's perfectly fine. Here's a group of volunteers. I think that could be really helpful for you. Any questions, comments, concerns about that? So what do we do when there's so much to do? Just keep in mind what it is that you do best. Um, if if you do end up expanding, just be clear on whether or not it's temporary. Just because clear communication is going to make a big difference. If somebody shows up on Monday and to pick up food, diapers, and case management, to sign up for case management, and then on Friday they show up expecting the same thing, and then you no longer have that resource, it can be very frustrating for both the survivor and also the nonprofit that has to keep telling people that no, this isn't a norm. We don't provide these services. This is just temporary. So doing that on the front end makes a big difference as far as communication and alleviating that frustration. You truly, truly do not have to do this alone. there's so many amazing groups that do come together to make sure that the community is served holistically, from communication wise, from preparedness wide mitigation and things like that, rebuilding, responding, case management, funding, all of it. This is a long-term project. Don't add additional stress to yourself just by trying to get this planning done quickly or fast, because it is going to take time. And even if you just do one step at a time and it takes you a month to do that one step because you have to do this emergency planning on top of everything else that you're doing, take that month, alleviate that stress from yourself and just work on it when you can, but definitely work on it. All right, so some promising practices that we have kind of seen. If you have a backup plan, if your clients, staff, or volunteers get exposed or sick, knowing how you're going to communicate that to one another, knowing that you have to maintain flexibility. No one has gone through a pandemic before, at least not a worldwide pandemic before. So we're all learning, and it can be really frustrating to continuously review your plans and change tactics and stuff like that. But as we change and we improve and we learn day to day, hour to hour, we can get there. So just maintain that flexibility. So knowing what that backup plan looks like ahead of time before somebody gets exposed or sick makes it a lot easier to enact that plan when you have to, and kind of ramp up to say, we're shutting down our office. What is that going to look like? Everybody has to work from home and things like that. So, and then getting creative with volunteers. Don't be shy to get creative with that. Just because we know that we have to social distance. We know that we have to provide a lot of different services in a very different manner. So think about, if you only have one or two staff and you have a very small food pantry, can you do doorstep that just basically Uber Eats for your food pantry, right? Can you get some volunteers to help you deliver the food to them instead of having people come to your food pantry? Can you have your volunteers do wellness calls to your clients if you haven't seen them in a while? Google Voice is a great tool. It's free, that you can use so that they don't have to use their cell phone number, and you can refer, if you have to leave them a voicemail, just leave them your office number. But just think about that kind of thing. You can have them do specific projects for your clients, maybe building welcome home baskets. If you work with teachers or students, maybe a classroom kit with masks and hand sanitizer, and just something uplifting, something happy, that shows, you know, these people are thinking about me, and I'm not doing my work in vain. Food pantry, you could do a movie night bag, you could do some tutoring or virtual sign up for doing it at a park, tutoring at a park. Get a park shelter like this. At least you're not in the bright sun, and you have a picnic table to work on. You could do it outside and do it socially distanced. There's a lot of different things. Get creative with your volunteers and how your volunteers can do some work. The same thing with staff hours right now, with parents doing homeschooling and not homeschooling some days, and doing business and work. I'm sure you guys are all already getting very creative as far as evening hours and weekend hours, but just knowing that a lot of people are getting very creative with that piece. And also testing, vaccines, and recommendations. I'm not a medical person. I can't give you any advice on which way to go, but one thing to think of that has come up is whether or not you want to proceed with mandatory vaccinations. If you're a shelter, if you're a museum, if you're doing any type of volunteer housing and things like that, keep in mind what works for you and what may be um, a a good way to kind of flex on that. But it's really up to you. Do you want to make it mandatory or do you not? It is up to you. Don't be shy to have those conversations with your local public health office. Most places do have a warm line during business hours to help nonprofits and businesses kind of think through those, whether it's through environmental health or through public health. And also your emergency management team. I know I get a lot of those calls as well. And kind of on the flip side of that, we don't know what we don't know. If you see service gaps, if you see, if you have an idea or any concerns and things like that, there's no way that emergency management or your local public health knows all of the different nooks and crannies of your community. So even if it's just a quick email saying, hey, this is kind of a concern for me. I've gotten a couple of emails about that, hey, I have a question about socially distancing at vaccinations and things like that, or I have a question about this, or could we do a vaccination outreach site at this location? And a lot of times those conversations kind of lead and morph into amazing projects. But nobody knows what they don't know. So don't be shy to talk about that. So one of the questions that I receive is who would be a good resource to review your local emergency management plan? For New Hanover County, I'm the one that reviews and looks over emergency management plans for long-term care facilities, for a lot of different Medicaid, Medicare programs as well. So most of the time, emergency management offices and departments would be a good resource. Another one, if you are more environmental health concerned, if you provide food and things like that, your local food bank also can walk through them. I know the food bank of Southeastern North Carolina's does have an amazing person who does think about a lot of contingencies and plans and things like that. So there's a lot of different options for who can review plans. But as far as how do services such as crisis cleanup work in the community during disasters, and how can they help my organization? That's an amazing question. Crisis cleanup and platforms like that are amazing, because when you get a call from your customers, or if you get a call from, if you yourself need to report that you need help cutting down a tree, you need help with case management, you need help with, right now with COVID-19, you can ask for food and different resources. You can use crisis cleanup to help centralize that information. Another thing that's amazing about crisis cleanup is once that disaster is kind of closing out, and what I mean by that is most jobs have been accepted and things like that, a lot of that information will move towards the long-term recovery groups. And long-term recovery groups can then follow up on those people that have put in a request and things like that, and ask them if, in fact, that their tree was cut down, or the debris was cleaned up, or anything like that. Did you have any additional needs? Do you need food? Do you need new clothes? I saw that you had a roof damage. Do you need assistance with that? And so long-term recovery groups can kind of assist and facilitate kind of the long-term aspect of it through crisis cleanup. The best ways to document staff working hours during an emergency. That's also a great question. You could do it one of two ways. For us here in emergency management in New Hanover County, the way that we do it is we have literally just a paper login sheet, and people sign in and people sign out. And that's the way that we justify that somebody was here and somebody was present during those work hours. For remote, it's going to be very different because of COVID-19. A lot of things are changing. I strongly recommend using Google Calendar, Outlook Calendar, whatever calendar that you use, and just block it off and mark it in your calendar. So whenever you have a meeting, whenever you show up to work, just mark it in your calendar, and then you can use that as your sign-in sheet. That is the recommendation that I have heard. I need to confirm with FEMA themselves that they will accept that. But that is a way to say, I had meetings starting at 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. and these are the hours that I worked. So just to me, if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist. I don't know if anybody else is that way, but that's the way that I keep track of a lot of different meetings and how conversations went and when I had certain things, because day to day, I don't remember what happened yesterday unless it's on my calendar. And I will be sure to share this with you all. A needs assessment is a rapid needs assessment during a disaster and things like that. Oftentimes we just need to get an idea of how our community is doing or an idea of how the folks that we serve is doing. So rapid needs assessment, and the link is here. A hot wash, meaning your first gut instinct of what things went well and what things didn't go well, and then any comments, concerns, or questions. And the document is here for that. After action report is a little bit different than a hot wash, just because the after action report leads into an improvement plan to boost up your emergency plans and things like that. But after action is a little bit more, a little bit after, so you have a little bit more time. And what hazards am I prone to? You can take this and look at it, click on it, and it'll identify which ones will be working for you. There are a lot of free publications that you can request, and now the request form is online, so you submit it through there, and you can get a lot of free stuff, both for your organization and also the people that you serve. The Columbia University did create a continuity of operation plan training in a time of COVID-19. This is a webinar, it is recorded, and it's an amazing training, and they provide templates and everything like that within that webinar and this link. So it's basically a plug and play for your emergency plan. And that's actually the continuity of operation plan template that I used for the Disaster Coalition. All right, so my contact information is here, my email and my cell phone number. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I do have one other question that I would like to address. Maybe a couple, I missed some. I apologize. Awesome. So social media toolkits, and which platforms do I use and how do I get people to join and know about it? Canva is amazing. You can create, they already have the templates for your social media and everything like that. You literally just have to type it in, type in your message and download it. So that's one great. The platforms to use, I would just use the ones that you're currently using instead of trying to learn something new. So if you're already using Facebook, great. If you're already using Twitter, that's great. If you use Instagram, whatever platform that you all are using already, I suggest using continuously. and how to get people to join and know about it, talk to your clients about it, talk to your customers about it. And another good way is just liking and following other nonprofits and other groups as well.
Are there any mobile apps that are good to use to keep in contact with staff during an emergency?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think of the mobile app that I had to use during Florence. And it was basically a walkie-talkie app. And it was okay. For me, I had decided to stay in place during Hurricane Florence, so I stayed in Wilmington. And the way that I kept everybody updated, from my friends to family to coworkers, I would change my voicemail every day and just say, "Hey, it's Monday, and I'm doing okay." And people were able to call my phone even if I didn't have service. My voicemail would continue to update, so they would hear the following day. But as far as mobile apps, I would just, um, I mean, Teams, Slack, and things like that should be able to function, just because it is off of data and the servers are offsite.
And Audrey, I use GroupMe personally, and I find that's a good way to keep up with people as well. So that might be one option.
Absolutely.
Do we have any other questions? The resources that Audrey provided will go out in an email, a follow-up email. Okay, I don't see any other follow-up questions here. I just wanted to jump in really quickly. Thank you so much, Audrey, for being here today. We greatly appreciate your years of expertise and all the information that you've provided today. The governor's office, I just had a couple of updates from the governor's office regarding the COVID-19 vaccinations. So we are currently in phase 2, according to the DHHS website, and we do recommend that you check the DHH website regularly, because it is being updated, and there are changes being made as different recommendations come down from the CDC and also from NCDHHS. However, having said that, individual counties are maybe on a slightly different schedule depending on what the needs are within the county, depending on the size of the county. So they may move to a different phase than what is being shown on the DHHS website. If they don't have as many healthcare workers, if they don't have as many older adults, then they're going to move on down the line to essential workers, and then adults at high risk. So again, if you'll just consult the DHHS website for that information. Regarding our Lunch and Learns, again, it's North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, North Carolina Strategic Partnerships, and Volunteer NC are hosts for the Lunch and Learns. We have 2 upcoming. We have David Heinen with the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. He's going to be speaking about contract issues and pending legislation in 2 weeks. And then we have we are working on navigating the unemployment system in the next month. So we hope you'll be able to join us for those. As far as future topics go, we would love to hear your feedback as to what topics you would like to hear more about. And also, we do send out a survey after these. And we really depend on your feedback to be able to provide you the programming that you need to see as a nonprofit. So without further ado, I will end. Again, Audrey, thank you very much. And thank you to my my coworkers here at Volunteer NC. And everyone have a wonderful afternoon.